I need to tell you about the year I learned that the world doesn't reward merit, it punishes threats. I was 17 when they destroyed me, 32 when I returned the favor. The 15 years between those points weren't spent fantasizing about revenge or nursing wounds in some dramatic exile. They were spent building something so substantial, so unassailable, that when I finally chose to act, it would feel less like vengeance and more like gravity, inevitable, impersonal, absolute. But I'm getting ahead of myself. This story doesn't start with power. It starts with a mop bucket and the particular smell of industrial floor cleaner that still makes my chest tight when I encounter it unexpectedly. My father died when I was 9. Heart attack, sudden, no warning. One morning he was making pancakes badly. He always burned them. Mom always pretended not to notice. And 6 hours later he was gone. The funeral was small. My mother wore the same black dress she'd worn to her own mother's funeral 3 years earlier. I remember thinking it was practical, efficient, the kind of decision that made sense when you couldn't afford to buy clothes you'd only wear once. After the funeral, Mom sat me down at our kitchen table, laminate top, one leg slightly shorter than the others, something we'd gotten used to, and explained our new reality with the kind of calm that only comes from having already cried yourself empty. Your father had a life insurance policy through his work, she said. It's not large, but it's enough to keep us in this house for now. I'm going to take a position at Ashcroft Academy, custodial work. It pays better than what I was making at the hospital laundry, and there's a benefit. Staff children can attend tuition free. I was 9. I didn't understand what Ashcroft Academy was, not really. I knew it was the private school on the hill, the one with the iron gates and the perfectly maintained grounds that I'd passed countless times on. The bus. I knew kids who went there wore uniforms and carried leather bags that probably cost more than our monthly grocery budget. I don't want to go there, I said. I want to stay at Lincoln Elementary. Mom reached across the table and took my hand. Her fingers were rough from years of industrial work, the nails clipped short, practical. I know, baby, but this is the opportunity your father would have wanted for you. Lincoln is fine, but Ashcroft is. It's different. The education there, the opportunities, they can change a life. She wasn't wrong. She also had no idea what it would cost. I started at Ashcroft Academy that fall. The first day, a kid named Preston Latimer asked me if my mother was the new cleaning lady. I said yes. He laughed, not cruelly, just as though I'd confirmed something amusing, and said, "That's cool. My dad owns the company that supplies the cleaning products. Maybe our parents will work together." He meant it nicely, that was the thing. About Preston, he was never malicious. He simply existed in a world where it was natural that some people owned companies and other people cleaned toilets with the products those companies manufactured. He didn't think there was anything wrong with either role. He just knew which one he occupied. I learned quickly that Ashcroft wasn't just a school. It was an ecosystem with its own rules, hierarchies, and unspoken codes. The students fell roughly into 3 categories: old money, new money, and scholarship. Old money families had names on buildings and endowed chairs. They'd been attending Ashcroft for generations, their children's children already on a waiting list before they were conceived. New money families were tech entrepreneurs, hedge fund managers, successful surgeons, people who'd earned their wealth in a single generation and wanted to ensure their children had the connections and polish the old money kids inherited. Then there were the scholarship kids, faculty, children like me, students who'd earned their spots through academic merit and whose families couldn't afford the $40,000 annual tuition. We existed in a strange liminal space, accepted but never quite belonging, included but never quite equal. My mother worked second shift, 3 p.m. to 11 p.m., 5 days a week. She cleaned classrooms, emptied trash bins, mopped floors, scrubbed toilets. On weekends, she took extra shifts doing deep cleaning, carpet shampooing, window washing, the heavy work that required bringing in additional staff. She never complained, not once, but I saw the way her hands cramped up from gripping the mop handle, the way she winced when she bent down, the exhaustion that made her fall asleep on the couch most nights before she could make it to bed. I remember one evening in 5th grade, staying late for a science club meeting. The meeting ran until 6, and I was walking through the hallways toward the front entrance when I saw her. She was on her knees in the main corridor, scrubbing at a stain on the marble floor. Her hair was tied back with a rubber band, and she wore the blue uniform all the custodial staff wore. She didn't see me at first, and I stood there watching her work with the kind of focused intensity she brought to everything. Then she looked up and smiled, that warm smile that made everything feel safer. "Hey, baby, meeting run late?" "Yeah, we were building model rockets." "That sounds fun. You want to wait for me? I've got another hour, then we can walk out together." I said yes, and sat in the library reading while she finished her shift. When we finally left together, walking through the parking lot toward our old Toyota, I saw Preston getting into his father's Mercedes. He waved cheerfully, I waved back, and I felt something I couldn't quite name. Not resentment exactly, but an acute awareness of distance, of difference, of the gulf between his life and mine. I studied. That's what I did. I studied with the kind of intensity that only comes from understanding that academic excellence wasn't just about grades. It was about justifying my presence, about proving that I deserved the opportunity my mother's labor was purchasing. By the time I was in 10th grade, I was ranked first in my class. By junior year, I'd taken every AP course Ashcroft offered and was working through independent studies in advanced mathematics and classical literature. My teachers praised my work ethic. My classmates, well, they didn't exactly resent me, but they didn't embrace me either. I was the kid who broke the curve, who made everyone else look lazy by comparison, whose mother they sometimes saw pushing a cleaning cart through the hallways when they stayed late for lacrosse practice or debate team meetings. There were small moments that reminded me of my place. In junior year, a girl named Elodie Pennington was organizing a study group for AP History. She invited most of the top students in. The class gathered everyone together during lunch, passed around a sign-up sheet. When the sheet came to me, every time slot was already full. "Sorry," Elodie said with a sympathetic smile. "I guess we're at capacity, but I'll send you the notes afterward." She did send the notes. They were thorough, well-organized, exactly what you'd expect from someone whose family ran a media empire. And I understood that the rejection wasn't personal, it was structural. The study group met at various students' homes, in their family rooms and finished basements, spaces I couldn't comfortably enter, because entering those spaces would require acknowledging that we were peers, equals, friends. The notes were a kindness, a way of including me academically while maintaining the social distance that made everyone more comfortable. I had friends, sort of. Other scholarship kids, mostly. We'd eat lunch together, work on group projects, maintain a functional social presence, but we all understood the invisible barrier. We could participate in Ashcroft's academic life, but not its social life. We weren't invited to the parties at lakeside vacation homes, the ski trips to Aspen, the summer programs in Europe that required parental donations to secure placement. That was fine. I told myself it was fine. I had a plan. I would graduate at the top of my class, earn a full scholarship to an elite university, build a career, lift my mother out of the life of physical labor she'd been forced into by my father's death. The pathway was clear. All I had to do was keep my head down, keep performing, keep proving I deserved to be there. Then senior year began, and everything I thought I understood about how the world worked turned out to be catastrophically wrong. The Ashcroft Academy National Merit Examination was an institution unto itself. Every year, the top senior students from elite preparatory schools across the country competed in a comprehensive examination covering mathematics, sciences, literature, history, and critical reasoning. The winner received more than just a trophy. They received a full scholarship to any university in the country, a guaranteed position in a summer program at the State Department, letters of recommendation from sitting senators and Supreme Court justices, and most importantly, entry into a network of previous winners who occupied positions of extraordinary influence. Previous winners included 2 current senators, a federal appellate judge, the youngest partner in the history of a major consulting firm, and the director of a prominent think tank. Winning the national merit wasn't just prestigious. It was a golden ticket to a particular version of American power, the kind built on credentialed meritocracy and elite institutional connections. For students at Ashcroft, the national merit was taken extremely seriously. The school's reputation was partly built on its consistent success in the competition. We'd produced 7 winners. In the past 15 years, far more than any other institution our size, the administration viewed each national merit season as both an opportunity to showcase our academic excellence and a high-stakes test of our institutional effectiveness. In September of my senior year, our headmaster, Dr. Victor Ashcroft, yes, that Ashcroft, great-great-grandson of the founder, called an assembly for the senior class. Dr. Ashcroft was in his 60s, tall and thin, with silver hair and the kind of patrician bearing that came from generations of assumed authority. He spoke in the measured cadences of someone accustomed to being listened to, his voice carrying easily through the auditorium without needing to be raised. The National Merit Examination, he began, represents the pinnacle of academic achievement at the secondary level. For those of you who have worked diligently throughout your time here, this is your opportunity to demonstrate not just what you've learned, but who you've become. Ashcroft has a legacy of excellence in this competition. We intend to continue that legacy. He outlined the selection process. All seniors would take a preliminary examination in October. The top 5 scorers would receive additional support and preparation for the national competition in April. Private tutoring, access to past examinations, exemption from certain standard coursework to allow for focused study. I took the preliminary exam on a Tuesday morning in mid-October. 3 hours, 200 questions, everything from differential equations to Renaissance art history to constitutional law. I walked out feeling neither confident nor defeated, just wrung out, the particular exhaustion that comes from sustained mental effort. Results were posted 2 weeks later. I was ranked first. Second place went to Celeste Radcliffe, daughter of Jonathan Radcliffe, who sat on Ashcroft's board of trustees and had donated the money for our new science center. Third was Preston Latimer. Fourth was Elodie Pennington. Fifth was Adrian Whitlock, whose father was a federal judge. I was the only scholarship student in the top 5. I was also the only one whose spot wasn't, in some way, predetermined by family legacy or financial contribution. The next Monday, Dr. Ashcroft called the 5 of us to his office. It was the first time I'd been inside. A large room with mahogany furniture, Persian rugs, and walls lined with leather-bound books that looked more decorative than functional. He congratulated us, handed us folders containing study materials, and explained that we'd meet twice weekly with specialized tutors to prepare. "This is a tremendous opportunity," he said, looking at each of us in turn. "Not just for you as individuals, but for Ashcroft as an institution. The examination is in April. That gives us 6 months to prepare. I expect each of you to approach this with the seriousness it deserves." As we left his office, Celeste fell into step beside me. She was striking, tall, with dark hair, and the kind of effortless confidence that came from growing up beautiful and wealthy. We'd had classes together for years, but had rarely spoken beyond academic necessities. "Congratulations," she said. "First place is impressive." "Thanks, you too. Second place is—" "Not first," she said, but she was smiling. "I'm competitive, fair warning." Over the next few weeks, we fell into a pattern. The 5 of us would meet with our tutors, specialists brought in from various universities, each focusing on a different subject area. Mathematics on Mondays, sciences on Wednesdays, humanities on Fridays. Between sessions, we studied individually, worked through practice problems, traded notes and strategies. The mathematics tutor was a professor named Dr. Malcolm Corbett from a nearby university. He was in his 50s, wore tweed jackets with elbow patches, and had the kind of encyclopedic knowledge that made even the most complex proofs feel accessible. He'd spend 2 hours with us each session, working through problems on a whiteboard, asking us to explain our reasoning, pushing us to see patterns and connections. "Mathematics," he said during one session, "isn't about memorizing formulas. It's about developing intuition for how systems behave. When you see a problem, you should be able to feel your way toward a solution before you've written down a single equation." I loved those sessions. The pure intellectual challenge, the way a difficult problem would suddenly resolve into clarity, the satisfaction of understanding something deeply rather than superficially. Dr. Corbett noticed my enthusiasm and would sometimes stay after the official session ended, working through additional problems with me, sharing insights about higher mathematics I'd encounter in university. The sciences tutor was a woman named Dr. Renata Fairweather, a chemist who'd done significant research on polymer synthesis. She approached teaching with the same rigor she brought to research, precise, methodical, uncompromising about accuracy. "Science," she told us, "is not about knowing facts. It's about understanding processes. When I ask you why a reaction produces a particular product, I don't want you to tell me it does. I want you to explain the mechanism, the intermediate steps, the thermodynamic and kinetic factors that make that outcome favorable." The humanities tutor was Dr. Nolan Stratmore, a literature professor who specialized in American modernism. He was younger than the other tutors, probably in his 30s, and brought an infectious enthusiasm to the material. "Literature," he said during our first session, "is the art of making meaning from language. When you read a text for this examination, you're not just summarizing plot or identifying themes. You're analyzing how the author constructs meaning through word choice, structure, imagery, syntax. You're reverse engineering the architecture of significance." I excelled in all 3 areas, but what I noticed during these sessions was how differently my peers approached learning. Preston was methodical and hard-working, but lacked intuitive insight. He could learn any process you taught him, but he struggled with problems that required novel applications of known principles. Elodie was brilliant with language, less confident with mathematics, and approached science like a puzzle to be solved through careful logic. Adrian was consistently strong across all subjects, though he never seemed to love the material the way I did. For him, it was work, important work, but still work. And then there was Celeste. Celeste was smart in a different way. She didn't have my raw analytical ability in mathematics, but she had something I lacked: the ability to see the bigger picture, to understand not just what was true, but why it mattered. In literature discussions, she could connect a modernist novel to contemporary political theory to historical patterns of social change. She made everything feel integrated, part of a larger understanding of how human systems worked. We started studying together outside the official sessions. It began casually. I'd mention I was having trouble with a particular aspect of organic chemistry. She'd suggest we work through it together. or she'd be struggling with a calculus problem, and I'd walk her through the solution. Gradually, these collaborations became routine. We'd meet in the library after school, work through problems until the building closed, continue the conversation as we walked to our cars. "You know," she said one evening in late November, "you're going to win this thing." We were in the library, the only two people left on the third floor. Outside, early winter darkness had fallen, and snow was just beginning to drift past the windows. "You don't know that," I said. "I do, actually. You're better than the rest of us, not by a huge margin in every area, but consistently better across all domains. That's what the national merit tests. Not brilliance in one area, but sustained excellence across all of them." "You're pretty excellent yourself," she laughed. "I'm good, I'm very good, but you're something else. You have this focus, like the exam is the most important thing in the world to you." "It is," I said, and immediately regretted the honesty. She looked at me for a long moment. "Because of your mom?" I didn't answer. "I'm not trying to be invasive," she said. I see her sometimes. When I'm leaving late, she's always working, and I think about how different our lives are and how unfair that is, and then I feel guilty for thinking about it, because feeling guilty doesn't actually change anything." "You don't need to feel guilty," I said. "You didn't create the system." "No, but I benefit from it. We all do. Everyone here except you and the other scholarship kids. We're here because our parents could afford it, not because we earned it. You earned your spot in the top 5. Did I? Or did I earn it because I had tutors since I was 8, and summers at academic enrichment programs, and parents who could afford to care about things like intellectual development, because they weren't working 3 jobs to keep the lights on?" It was the most honest conversation I'd had with someone from the other side of Ashcroft's economic divide. I didn't know how to respond. "I hope you win," she said finally. "I mean, I'm going to try to beat you because I'm pathologically competitive, but if I can't win, I hope you do. You deserve it more than any of us." I thought about that conversation a lot in the weeks that followed. The casual acknowledgement of privilege, the genuine respect for what I'd achieved despite disadvantage, the way she could see the system clearly without being defensive about her position in it. It made me wonder if maybe there was space for real friendship across the economic divide, if maybe I'd been wrong to assume connection was impossible. December passed. The preparation intensified. We worked through hundreds of practice problems, took mock examinations under timed conditions, analyzed our mistakes, refined our approaches. Dr. Ashcroft began holding weekly meetings with each of us individually, reviewing our progress, identifying weaknesses, pushing us harder. My individual meeting with Dr. Ashcroft in mid-December was encouraging. He praised my consistency, noted that I was scoring in the 98th percentile across all subject areas in the practice exams, told me I was exactly where I needed to be. "You're doing exceptional work," he said. "Your mother must be very proud." "Thank you, sir. I want you to know that regardless of the outcome in April, you've already proven yourself. The fact that you're here, competing at this level despite the disadvantages you faced, that speaks to extraordinary character and ability." I appreciated the recognition, though there was something slightly uncomfortable about the way he framed my circumstances as disadvantages, rather than simply different economic realities. But I understood he meant well, and I left the meeting feeling confident about my preparation. January brought a new intensity to the work. The tutoring sessions became longer, more demanding. Dr. Corbett started bringing problems from graduate-level mathematics, pushing us to extend our thinking beyond what would actually appear on the exam. Dr. Fairweather had us design and mentally execute complex experimental protocols. Dr. Stratmore assigned dense theoretical essays about literary interpretation. I thrived under the increased pressure. This was what I was good at. Sustained intellectual effort, the ability to maintain focus and performance even when exhausted. I'd wake up at 5:30, study for 90 minutes before school, attend classes, work through the afternoon tutoring sessions, study until 11, or midnight, sleep 6 hours, repeat. My mother noticed the intensity but didn't question it. She understood what the national merit meant, what winning could do for my future. Some nights, when she got home from her shift around 11:30, she'd find me still at my desk, surrounded by textbooks and practice exams. She'd bring me a glass of water, kiss the top of my head, tell me not to stay up too much longer. "I'm proud of you, baby," she'd say, "but don't forget to take care of yourself too." I'd promise to go to bed soon, and usually I meant it. But there was always one more problem to solve, one more passage to analyze, one more concept to master. February. The preparation took on a desperate edge. We were 2 months from the examination, and every practice test mattered. Every weak area needed to be strengthened. The 5 of us had become something like a unit, competitive but supportive, pushing each other harder precisely because we respected each other's abilities. Celeste and I continued our evening study sessions. We'd moved beyond just working through problems together. We'd started talking about the bigger questions, the philosophical implications of what we were learning. Why does mathematics work as a description of physical reality? What makes a literary interpretation valid or invalid? How do you balance empirical evidence with theoretical elegance in scientific reasoning? One evening in late February, after we'd finished working through a particularly difficult set of physics problems, she asked me something unexpected. "What do you want to do with your life? After university, I mean. What's the plan?" "I don't know exactly," I said. "Something in research, maybe, or education. Something that uses what I'm good at, but also matters." "You want to help people, I guess. Or at least not make things worse. What about you?" "My father wants me to go into the family business, real estate development. But I think I want to do policy work. Something at the intersection of urban planning and social equity. Figure out how to build cities that actually serve everyone, not just wealthy people." "That sounds ambitious." "It's probably naive. I'll probably end up doing exactly what my father wants, working on luxury developments that price out the people who actually need housing. But at least for now, I can pretend I'll do something different." There was a sadness in her voice that surprised me. For all her advantages, she seemed genuinely conflicted about her place in the system, about whether she could use her privilege for something other than perpetuating inequality. "I think you'll do what you want," I said. "You're stubborn enough." She smiled. "Thanks, I think." Early March. Dr. Ashcroft called me to his office. I assumed it was for another progress check, another review of my practice exam scores. Instead, he had a different kind of request. "I need to ask you for help with something," he said. "It's sensitive, and it requires discretion." I waited. "The National Merit Examination is administered by an independent organization, but the exam materials, the actual test booklets, are shipped to participating schools 2 weeks before the examination date. This is standard procedure. The materials arrive in sealed packages, which are stored in a secure location until the day of the test." "Okay," I said, not understanding where this was going. "I need someone to help me verify the materials when they arrive, to ensure everything is in order, correct number of booklets, answer sheets, all administrative materials present. It's a simple inventory check, but it requires 2 people for security purposes. Usually I'd ask my assistant, but she's on medical leave." "You want me to help you check the exam materials?" "Yes, it would require perhaps an hour of your time, and it would be done in my office with both of us present. Complete transparency, I'm asking you because you're the most responsible student I know, and because I trust your discretion. This is sensitive information. The fact that the materials are here early, the security procedures. I need someone who won't discuss it. I should have seen it." Looking back, the manipulation was obvious. Why choose a student competitor to help with administrative security? Why not choose a teacher, another administrator, literally anyone who wasn't taking the examination? But I was 17, and the headmaster of my school, a man whose family name was literally on the building, was telling me he trusted me with something important. Of course, I said. I'd be happy to help. Excellent. The materials arrive next Friday. Come to my office at 4:30. We'll take care of it then. I told no one. That was part of the mistake. I didn't mention it to my mother, didn't tell Celeste or any of the other preparation students. Dr. Ashcroft had asked for discretion, and I gave it to him completely. The following Friday, I showed up at his office at 4:30. He was waiting with 3 sealed boxes, official National Merit Organization labels on each one. The labels had serial numbers, security seals, official stamps. Everything looked legitimate and professional. We opened them together, him at his desk, me standing beside him. Each box contained examination booklets, thick packets of stapled pages, the questions printed in clean black type. There were answer sheets, pencils with the National Merit logo, instructions for proctors, administrative forms. We checked the contents against a packing list, counting booklets, verifying quantities. The entire process took exactly 47 minutes. It was boring, methodical work, the kind of administrative task that needed to be done, but didn't require any particular skill. When we finished, Dr. Ashcroft repacked the boxes, resealed them with the security tape, and stored them in a locked cabinet behind his desk. "Thank you," he said. "This was very helpful. I appreciate your assistance and your discretion." "Of course, sir." He offered me a bottle of water from the small refrigerator in his office. I accepted, drank half of it, felt suddenly very tired from a week of insufficient sleep and constant studying. "Remember," he said as I prepared to leave, "this stays between us. Security protocols require that we limit knowledge of when and where the materials are stored. I trust you won't mention this to anyone." "I understand. I won't say anything." I left his office, walked through the empty hallways toward the parking lot, drove home thinking about the organic chemistry concepts I needed to review that evening. 3 weeks later, my entire life detonated. The email went to every student, faculty member, parent, and board member simultaneously. It arrived at 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, 3 days before the National Merit Examination. "Urgent security breach, National Merit Examination compromise," the subject line, was enough to make my stomach drop. I opened the email on my phone, still in bed, pre-dawn light barely filtering through my bedroom window. The email explained that examination materials had been accessed inappropriately, that information had been distributed to at least one student competitor, that the breach represented a fundamental violation of academic integrity. Based on digital evidence, security footage, and witness testimony, they had identified the student responsible. That student had been removed from competition and would face appropriate disciplinary action. The email didn't name the student, just said that interviews had been conducted, evidence had been gathered, and appropriate consequences would follow. I read it 3 times, my brain refusing to process what it was saying. A breach, digital evidence, security footage, a student identified. My phone buzzed. Text message from a number I didn't recognize. "Did you cheat?" Then another, "I can't believe you would do this." Then another, "Wow." Then another, "Your poor mom." I sat up in bed, heart pounding. Why were people texting me? How did they know it was me? Then I saw the follow-up email, sent 10 minutes after the first. This one was addressed only to senior students. As a matter of transparency, and to address the rumors that are inevitably circulating, I want to confirm that the student responsible for the security breach has been identified through clear and convincing evidence. While I cannot share all details of the investigation due to privacy considerations, I can confirm that the student had legitimate access to my office for administrative purposes, used that access to photograph examination materials, and subsequently discussed this information with other students. The student has been removed from the national merit competition and will receive appropriate disciplinary consequences. The other 4 competitors had no knowledge of or involvement in the breach, and the ESI competition will proceed with new examination materials. It didn't name me, but it described the situation in enough detail that anyone paying attention would know exactly who it was. I was the only competitor who'd been in Dr. Ashcroft's office for administrative purposes. Everyone had seen me leaving his office that Friday afternoon. By the time I got to school, everyone knew, or thought they knew. The story was already fully formed. I'd been helping Dr. Ashcroft with administrative work, had access to the exam materials, had photographed them, had been studying from the actual test. Some versions of the story claimed I'd been sharing information with other scholarship students, trying to help them cheat too. Other versions said I'd been planning to sell the information to competitors from other schools. I was called to Dr. Ashcroft's office at 8:15 a.m. This time, I wasn't alone. My mother was there, looking small and terrified in one of the leather chairs. Her eyes were red from crying. She'd taken the morning off work, something she never did, to come to this meeting. A man I didn't recognize, later I learned he was the school's attorney, sat beside Dr. Ashcroft's desk. There was also a woman I vaguely recognized as a member of the Board of Trustees, Maribel Kensington, her expression stern and disappointed. "Please sit down," Dr. Ashcroft said. His voice was grave, laden with sadness. I sat. My mother reached for my hand, gripped it tightly. "I assume you've seen this morning's emails," Dr. Ashcroft continued. "I'm sorry to have to tell you this, but the evidence is overwhelming. When I asked you to help verify the examination materials, I trusted that you would maintain the security and confidentiality of that process. Instead, you used your phone to photograph multiple pages of the examination." "I didn't," I said. "I didn't photograph anything. I didn't even take my phone out of my pocket." "We have security footage showing you with your phone in your hand while the materials were visible on my desk," Dr. Ashcroft said. "We have digital forensics showing that photographs were taken on a device connected to the school's Wi-Fi network at the exact time you were in this office, and we have testimony from other students that you claim to have special knowledge of likely examination topics." "That's not—" "I never said that. I never took any pictures. I don't even know what you're talking about." "My son says you mentioned it," Elodie Pennington said, leaning forward. I hadn't noticed her in the corner of the room, but there she was, looking troubled but certain. "He was studying with you last week, and you told him you had a good sense of what would be on the exam, that you'd seen the general structure of the questions." "I said I had a good sense of what might be tested based on the practice materials," I said. "That's not the same thing. Everyone in the study group talks about what we think will be on the exam. There's also the matter of the photographs themselves," the attorney said. "The digital forensics are clear. Photos were taken of examination materials on a device connected to your student account Wi-Fi credentials." "I didn't take any photos," I said again. "Someone else must have. This doesn't make sense. Dr. Ashcroft was there the whole time. He knows I didn't take out my phone." Dr. Ashcroft looked pained. "I was there, yes, but I was reviewing the packing lists, focused on verifying the materials. I didn't observe every single moment of your presence. It would have been quite easy for you to photograph materials while I was looking down at paperwork. But I didn't. I would never—" "I understand this is difficult," Dr. Ashcroft said, "and I want you to know that I've advocated for the lightest possible consequences. You're not being expelled. You're being removed from the national merit competition, and you'll receive a formal academic integrity violation on your permanent record, but you'll be allowed to graduate with your class." My mother was crying now, silent tears running down her face. "This is insane," I said. You asked me to help you. You were there the entire time. You know I didn't do this. I know that I trusted you," Dr. Ashcroft said quietly, and his voice actually broke slightly. "And I know that trust was misplaced. I feel genuinely terrible about this. I feel responsible for creating the opportunity for this to happen. If I hadn't asked you to help with the inventory, you wouldn't have had access to the materials." He looked genuinely regretful. "That was the thing that broke me. Not anger or accusation, but this performance of sad disappointment, as though he truly believed I'd betrayed him and felt partly responsible for enabling my moral failure." "I want to see the evidence," I said. "The security footage, the digital forensics, all of it. If you're going to ruin my life based on this, I want to see exactly what you think happened." "That's not possible," the attorney said. "This is an internal investigation. The evidence will be provided to the National Merit Organization as required, but it's not subject to student review. We have protocols to protect the privacy of all involved parties." "What about my privacy? What about my right to defend myself?" "You've been given the opportunity to respond to the allegations," the attorney said. "You've denied them. Your denial has been noted, but the evidence is clear and compelling, and the administration has made a decision based on that evidence." "What evidence? You won't even show it to me." "We have a responsibility to protect the integrity of our investigative process," Maribel Kensington said. Her voice was cold, final. "The decision has been made. You're removed from the national merit competition. You'll receive an academic integrity violation on your permanent record, and you should consider yourself fortunate that you're being allowed to graduate at all." My mother spoke for the first time. "Is there no appeal? No review process? He's telling you he didn't do this." "Of course he's saying that," the attorney replied. "But the evidence tells a different story. I understand this is difficult for you as a parent, but we have an obligation to maintain academic integrity, and that sometimes requires making difficult decisions." "You're destroying his future," my mother said. Her voice was shaking. "Everything he's worked for, everything we've sacrificed, you're throwing it away based on evidence you won't even show us." "We're enforcing the standards that make Ashcroft Academy an institution of excellence," Dr. Ashcroft said. "I take no pleasure in this, but academic integrity is not negotiable." The meeting ended. There was nothing more to say. My mother and I left his office in silence, walked through hallways that felt suddenly hostile, every eye on us, every whisper audible. In the parking lot, my mother turned to me. "Did you do it?" The question landed like a physical blow. "No. Mom, I swear I didn't do anything." "I believe you," she said, but I could hear the uncertainty in her voice. Not doubt about my character, but doubt about whether my innocence mattered, whether believing me changed anything about what was happening. Over the next 3 days, the story calcified into truth through sheer repetition. Everyone knew I'd cheated. Everyone had theories about why. Desperation to escape my circumstances, pressure to succeed, resentment of wealthier students who didn't have to work as hard. The local newspaper ran a story. Ashcroft Academy rocked by cheating scandal. They didn't name me. I was a minor, but everyone in town knew anyway. The article mentioned that a scholarship student had compromised examination materials, that the student's parent worked for the school, that the breach represented a betrayal of the institution's trust. I stopped going to classes after the first day. The stares, the whispers, the way even teachers looked at me with disappointment and pity. It was unbearable. Dr. Ashcroft allowed me to complete my coursework remotely for the remainder of the semester, a small mercy that felt more like exile. The other 4 competitors took the National Merit Examination on schedule, with new materials shipped specially by the National Merit Organization. Celeste won. When the results were announced 2 weeks later, I was in my bedroom, lying on my bed, staring at the ceiling. I'd tried to talk to her. The day after the initial email went out, I saw her in the hallway before I stopped attending classes. I called her name. She looked at me for a long moment, her expression unreadable, Not anger exactly, but something careful, guarded. Then she turned and walked away without saying anything. I tried texting her. I didn't do it. Please, you know me. You know I wouldn't cheat. She didn't respond. I tried again. Can we at least talk? I just want to explain. Still nothing. Later, much later, I'd understand why. But in that moment, all I understood was abandonment by someone I'd thought was a friend. Preston Latimer sent me a text. Hey man, this is really rough. I hope you're okay. It was kind, genuine, the closest thing to support I received from anyone in the top 5. But even his kindness had a note of finality to it, as though he was saying goodbye to someone who'd already left. My mother got sick in May. At first it seemed like stress, headaches, fatigue, difficulty sleeping. She'd cry sometimes, late at night when she thought I couldn't hear. The shame of what had happened, the way her co-workers at Ashcroft looked at her now, the fact that her son had been publicly accused of cheating. It was devastating. But the symptoms worsened. By June, she could barely make it through a shift. She was losing weight, couldn't keep food down, kept saying she just needed to rest, that it was just stress and it would pass. Finally, I insisted she see a doctor. She refused at first. We couldn't afford it. The insurance from Ashcroft was basic. She'd be fine. But when she collapsed at work in early June, the school required a medical evaluation. Cancer, pancreatic, stage 4, inoperable. The doctor explained it with clinical precision. The tumor had metastasized to her liver and lymph nodes. Chemotherapy might extend her life by a few months, but wouldn't cure it. She had perhaps 6 months, probably less. My mother took the news with the same quiet dignity she'd shown throughout her life. She nodded, asked a few practical questions about pain management and treatment options, thanked the doctor. In the car on the way home, she was silent. I was driving. I'd gotten my license the previous year, and I could see her in my peripheral vision, staring out the window, tears running silently down her face. "I'm sorry, baby," she said finally. "For what? Mom, you have nothing to be sorry for. I wanted to see you go to college. I wanted to see what you'd become. You will. You'll beat this. We'll get treatment. We'll—" "No," she said gently. "We won't. It's okay. I've had a good life. I got to raise you. That's enough." It wasn't enough. It wasn't anywhere close to enough. The medical bills were catastrophic. The school's insurance covered some of the initial diagnosis and treatment, but the experimental therapies that might have extended her life weren't covered. I called the insurance company, argued with representatives, filed appeals. Everything was denied. She stopped working in July. The school was generous about it. They continued her insurance coverage even though she wasn't actively employed, and they didn't ask for our house back, even though it was technically school-affiliated housing. Small mercies that did nothing to address the fundamental situation. I graduated from Ashcroft in June. They allowed that much, a diploma handed to me in a private ceremony in Dr. Ashcroft's office rather than at the public graduation. My transcript showed excellent grades in every subject and a formal academic integrity violation that made university admission impossible. I'd applied to colleges anyway, back in the fall before everything fell apart. I'd been accepted to 3 excellent universities with generous financial aid packages. After the scandal, all 3 schools rescinded their offers. The letters were polite but clear. The academic integrity violation raised serious concerns about my suitability for their institutions. I got a job at a warehouse, loading trucks during overnight shifts. Then a second job at a gas station, working afternoons and evenings. Between the 2 jobs, I could work 16-hour days, sleep 6 hours, spend the remaining 2 hours with my mother. She deteriorated quickly. The pain got worse despite the medications. She couldn't eat without vomiting. She slept most of the day, By September, she'd been moved to hospice care, a small facility that smelled of antiseptic and sadness, where nurses spoke in hushed tones and families sat vigil beside dying parents, spouses, children. I sat with her every day during my 2 free hours. Sometimes she was lucid, and we'd talk about nothing important: the weather, a show on television, a memory from my childhood. Sometimes she was confused from the medications, thought I was my father, asked where we'd put the pancakes. The day before she died, she had a moment of clarity. I was sitting beside her bed, holding her hand, and she opened her eyes and looked at me with perfect recognition. "You didn't cheat, did you?" "No, Mom, I didn't." I knew it, I always knew it, but I was scared to believe it because believing it meant accepting that they did that to you, and I couldn't protect you from it. It's not your fault. I should have fought harder. I should have demanded to see the evidence, hired a lawyer, done something, but I was just a custodian. What was I going to do against the Ashcrofts? You did everything you could. You gave me everything. She smiled weakly. You're going to be okay, baby. You're so smart, so strong. You're going to build a good life. She died the next day, October 15th, the day before her 54th birthday. I was there when it happened. She simply stopped breathing. The machines around her bed making quiet sounds. The nurse coming in to check her pulse and nodding solemnly. The funeral was even smaller than my father's. Just me, a few of her co-workers from Ashcroft who still believed in her despite everything, and one of her sisters who drove up from Virginia. The service lasted 20 minutes. The coffin was the cheapest option available. I'd cashed in a small life insurance policy she had, $10,000 to pay for it. After the funeral, I stood in our small house, the same house my father had bought 30 years earlier, the same house I'd grown up in, and made a decision. Not revenge, not yet. Just survival first, then something else. I sold the house. The market wasn't great, but I got $95,000 for it. Combined with the remainder of my mother's life insurance and a small amount I'd saved from my warehouse job, I had about $40,000 after paying off final medical bills and settling her modest debts. It wasn't much, but it was enough to start. I left town 3 days after the funeral. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I just packed everything I owned into the trunk of my old car, some clothes, a few books, my mother's photo albums, and drove away from the place that had destroyed me. I spent the first year in Philadelphia, working construction during the day and attending community college at night. I used a different name, Julian Whitlock, pulled from my memories of Ashcroft. It wasn't quite identity theft. I wasn't impersonating a specific person, just borrowing components of identity that felt distant from who I'd been. The construction work was brutal. I started as a general laborer on residential framing crews, the absolute bottom of the construction hierarchy. The work was physically exhausting, carrying lumber, mixing concrete, demolition work that left my hands blistered and my back aching. Philadelphia summers were oppressively hot, and we'd be working on roofs under direct sun, the heat radiating off the shingles, making it feel like working inside an oven. Winters were worse, framing houses in December when the temperature was in the teens, my hands going numb even through work gloves, the wind cutting through every layer of clothing. But the work had advantages. It paid decently, $12 an hour to start, $15 after 6 months when I'd proven I was reliable and competent. More importantly, it kept me too exhausted to spend much time thinking about everything I'd lost. I'd work 8 hours on a construction site, go straight to community, college for evening classes, get home around 11, sleep 6 hours, repeat. Community college was different from Ashcroft in every way. The students were older, working adults mostly, people balancing education with jobs and families and complicated lives. There were single mothers taking accounting classes to qualify for better jobs, veterans using GI Bill benefits to transition into new careers, immigrants working toward degrees that would be recognized in America. The professors were less polished than Ashcroft's teachers, the facilities more worn, fluorescent lights that flickered, desks with graffiti carved into them, bathrooms that always smelled slightly of mold. But the education was legitimate. I took business courses, accounting, basic economics. Nothing theoretical, no discussions about the nature of knowledge or the architecture of meaning. Just practical knowledge about how money worked, how businesses operated, how systems functioned. I was good at it. The same analytical ability that had made me excel at Ashcroft translated perfectly to business concepts. I could see patterns in financial statements, understand how decisions would ripple through organizational structures, predict how markets would respond to various conditions. After 2 years, I'd saved $18,000 living in the cheapest studio apartment I could find, eating rice and beans most nights, never spending money on anything that wasn't absolutely necessary. I'd also completed my associate's degree with a 4.0 GPA, taking the maximum course load every semester, testing out of prerequisites wherever possible. I applied to state universities under my assumed identity. The background check was minimal for in-state schools, and I had enough documentation, work history, apartment lease, community college transcripts to establish the identity. I got accepted to 3 schools, chose the one with the best business program. This time, I qualified for financial aid. No mother's income to report, no family resources, no assets beyond a few $1,000s in savings. I was officially poor, which meant the government would actually help me pay for education. University was where I started to understand what power really looked like. I majored in finance and political science, a double major that let me see how money and influence interacted. Finance taught me the technical mechanisms, how capital flows work, how derivatives create leverage, how information asymmetries generate profit. Political science taught me the structural context, how institutions protect themselves, how narratives shape policy, how power consolidates and perpetuates. I took the maximum course load every semester, usually 18 credits when the normal load was 12. I worked 20 hours a week in the university library, shelving books and helping students with research. I lived in the cheapest student housing available, ate at the dining hall when I had a meal plan, cooked rice and beans in my dorm room when I didn't. But I was learning, not just the official curriculum, but the hidden structures beneath it. I learned that money wasn't just currency, it was leverage, access, the ability to make things happen. I learned that media wasn't just information distribution, it was narrative control, the power to decide what people believed. I learned that reputation was a fragile thing, built slowly over years and destroyed quickly through strategic manipulation. I also learned that I was good at this kind of thinking. The systems analysis, the strategic planning, the long-term perspective, all the things that had made me successful at Ashcroft, the same focus Celeste had noticed years ago, I could apply to building something real. I graduated in 3 years, summa cum laude, with $15,000 in student loan debt, modest by modern standards, and 2 job offers. One was from a large investment bank in New York, starting salary $85,000. The other was from a mid-sized investment firm in Boston, starting salary $58,000. I took the Boston job. The lower salary meant less scrutiny of my background, and Boston felt safer than New York, far enough from my hometown that I was unlikely to encounter anyone from my past, but close enough to the East Coast establishment that I could build the right kinds of connections. The investment firm was called Corbett Capital Management. We managed money for wealthy families, small endowments, institutional investors who weren't large enough for the major banks. My job was junior analyst, which meant I did all the research nobody else wanted to do, reading hundreds of pages of financial statements, building complex financial models, writing detailed reports that senior partners would present as their own work. I didn't mind. The work was interesting, and more importantly, I was learning how wealthy people thought about money. It wasn't about salary, or even net worth. It was about access, influence, the ability to move capital in ways that created more capital. I worked 90-hour weeks, in the office by 6 a.m., leaving around 8 or 9 at night, working most Saturdays. I was good at the modeling, excellent at the research, better than most of the other analysts at seeing patterns in data that others missed. After 2 years, I made associate. After 4 years, I made senior associate. My salary grew. $75,000, then $95,000, then $130,000. The raises felt enormous after years of poverty, but I didn't change my lifestyle. I still lived in the same tiny apartment in a marginal neighborhood, still ate cheap groceries, still wore the same rotation of professional clothing I'd bought at discount stores. The difference between my salary and my expenses went into savings, investments. I taught myself options trading, studying the mathematics of volatility and time decay. I got into cryptocurrency in 2013, before it was mainstream, bought Bitcoin at $90 and Ethereum in the pre-sale. I studied small-cap value stocks, looking for companies that were genuinely undervalued rather than just cheap. I won some, lost some, learned from both. The losses taught me more than the wins, taught me about risk management, position sizing, the importance of having conviction but being willing to admit when you were wrong. By the time I was 28, I had $340,000 in liquid assets. Not wealthy by Boston standards. There were associates at my firm who spent more than that on cars, but comfortable. More than that, mobile. I had enough capital to take risks, to start something of my own. That's when I started the media consulting firm. Not a massive venture, just a small operation initially. 2 employees, me and a former colleague from Corbett Capital named Curtis Southwell, who'd gotten tired of the investment world and wanted to do something more creative. We helped smaller organizations with public relations strategy, crisis management, media training. The work was fine, profitable enough, but it wasn't the real purpose. The real purpose was learning how information worked, how stories spread, how reputations were built and demolished, how you could destroy someone without ever confronting them directly, just by controlling what people believed about them. I studied every aspect of media operations, how journalists found sources, how editors decided what stories to run, how social media amplified certain narratives and suppressed others, how investigative journalism worked, the patient accumulation of evidence, the careful verification, the strategic timing of releases. I spent 2 years building the consultancy, learning the media landscape, developing relationships with journalists and editors and documentary filmmakers. My firm grew, 5 employees, then 10, then 15. We specialized in educational institutions and nonprofit organizations, which put me in contact with exactly the networks I needed. We did good work. We helped schools manage admissions scandals, helped nonprofits navigate financial investigations, helped organizations rebuild their reputations after various crises. I became known as someone who understood how to manage complex information problems, how to tell stories that shaped public perception. By the time I was 30, the consultancy was generating $800,000 in annual profit. I could have kept growing it, built it into something larger and more profitable. Instead, I sold it for $2.4 million to a larger public relations firm that wanted our client relationships and expertise. Not life-changing money by billionaire standards, but enough. Enough to fund what came next. I'd kept track of Ashcroft over the years. Not obsessively, just periodically checking their website, reading their newsletters, staying aware. I knew that Dr. Victor Ashcroft had retired in 2016, and his son, Spencer Ashcroft, had taken over as headmaster. I knew that Celeste Radcliffe had graduated from Yale, earned a master's degree in urban planning, and returned to our hometown to work in her father's real estate development company. I knew that Preston Latimer was running his family's manufacturing business. Adrian Whitlock was a prosecutor in the county district attorney's office. Elodie Pennington was managing editor at her family's newspaper chain. They'd all done exactly what they were supposed to do, taken their privileged starts and parlayed them into appropriate positions of local influence. Successful, respected, living the lives they'd always been meant to live. It was time to go home. I came back as Damien Montrose, founder and CEO of Montrose Education Partners, a nonprofit foundation focused on educational equity and opportunity. My story was simple and compelling. Self-made success. First generation, college graduate who'd built a career in finance and media. Now passionate about ensuring other students from disadvantaged backgrounds could access elite education. The identity was carefully constructed. I had a website, a well-documented professional history, references from people I'd worked with in Boston who knew me only as Damien. The foundation was legitimate. I'd seeded it with $500,000 and hired a small staff to run actual programs. I bought a house in the historic district of my hometown, not ostentatious, but unmistakably successful. A renovated Victorian, 3 bedrooms, hardwood floors, walking distance to the downtown area. I paid cash, which eliminated the need for extensive financial background checks. I donated $50,000 to the local hospital in my first month back. I joined the Chamber of Commerce. I attended charity events and fundraisers. I made appointments with local business leaders, presenting myself as someone who wanted to invest in the community's future. My first meeting was with Jonathan Radcliffe. His office was downtown, on the top floor of a building his company had developed. All glass and polished stone, with views of the river and the distant hills. He was in his mid-60s now, silver-haired, still handsome, the kind of man who'd probably been called distinguished his entire adult life. "Mr. Montrose," he said, shaking my hand with the firm grip of someone who'd spent a lifetime establishing dominance through small gestures. "Thank you for taking the time. I've read about your foundation. Impressive work." "Thank you. I'm hoping to expand our initiatives in this region. When I was researching communities with both need and existing educational infrastructure, your town kept coming up. Ashcroft Academy, in particular, seemed like a natural partner." "Ashcroft is a special place," Radcliffe said. "My daughter attended there. Best education she could have received. Opened doors that might otherwise have remained closed. I'd love to learn more about the institution, perhaps make a substantial donation. I believe in supporting schools that genuinely invest in student success." His eyes lit up. Nothing motivates wealthy board members like the prospect of a major donation from someone else. "This is wonderful to hear. The school has been working on expanding its scholarship program, trying to become more accessible to students from diverse socioeconomic backgrounds. Your support could be transformative." We talked for an hour. I explained my vision: funding for scholarship students, supplemental programming, mentorship opportunities, support for first-generation college-bound students, everything designed to sound generous and progressive, while actually requiring detailed financial oversight, regular reporting, deep involvement in school operations. "This sounds exactly like what Ashcroft needs," Radcliffe said. "I'd like to introduce you to our current headmaster, Spencer Ashcroft. He's much more forward-thinking than his father was about issues of access and equity. I think you two would work well together." "I'd appreciate that very much." He called Spencer right then, set up a lunch meeting for the following week. As I left his office, I allowed myself a moment of satisfaction. The first piece was in place. Over the next 3 months, I became deeply embedded in Ashcroft's operations. I met with Spencer Ashcroft multiple times, touring the campus, reviewing their scholarship programs, discussing their vision for the future. I made a $500,000 donation to create the Montrose Scholars Program. Full scholarships for 5 students from low-income backgrounds each year, with wraparound support services. The donation bought me a seat on the Board of Trustees. I attended my first board meeting in November, sitting around a mahogany table with 12 other people, all of them wealthy, all of them convinced they were doing important work supporting educational excellence. Jonathan Radcliffe chaired the board. He welcomed me warmly, praised my commitment to the school's mission, introduced me to the other trustees. Most of them were in their 50s and 60s, successful business owners or professionals whose children had attended Ashcroft. A few were younger, Celeste's age, early 30s, including a woman named Tamsin Hollingsby, who ran a venture capital firm. I participated actively in the board discussions, asking thoughtful questions, suggesting strategic initiatives, demonstrating genuine interest in the school's operations. I was careful not to overreach, to position myself as someone who wanted to help rather than control. After the meeting, Spencer Ashcroft pulled me aside. "I want to thank you again for your support. The Montrose Scholars Program is already changing lives. We've identified the first 5 students for next year, and they're exactly the kind of young people who deserve opportunities like this." "That's wonderful to hear," I said. "Though I have to say, I'm surprised your father's generation wasn't more invested in this kind of diversity." A slight tension crossed his face. My father's generation had different priorities. They cared about maintaining standards, preserving tradition. Sometimes that meant being less flexible about access. I understand that tension, though I wonder if sometimes maintaining standards was less about academic quality and more about protecting a particular social order. "Possibly," Spencer said carefully. "There was definitely an element of gatekeeping, but I try not to be too critical. They built something valuable, even if they were imperfect stewards of it. Of course, and you're doing important work correcting those imperfections." I also reconnected with Celeste, though indirectly at first. I made sure to attend the same charity events, the same fundraisers. I saw her from across rooms, noted that she'd aged gracefully, 32 now, still beautiful, but with a kind of polished sophistication that came from a decade of professional success. Eventually, we were introduced at a housing advocacy event. A mutual acquaintance, knowing we both worked on issues related to educational equity and affordable housing, made the connection. "Damien Montrose," she said, shaking my hand. Her grip was firm, professional. "I've heard so much about your foundation. It's really admirable work." "Thank you. I understand you're in real estate development." "Family business. We focus on sustainable urban development, mixed-income housing projects, trying to build communities that serve people across the economic spectrum rather than just luxury developments for wealthy buyers." "That's excellent. I'd love to learn more. Perhaps we could have coffee sometime. I'm always interested in connecting education initiatives with housing stability." "I'd like that. Let me get your card." We met the following week at a cafe downtown. She'd aged gracefully, still had the same confidence I remembered, but tempered now with professional experience. She wore expensive but understated clothing, carried herself with the assurance of someone who'd spent a decade building a legitimate career. "The challenge," she explained when I asked about her work, "is balancing financial viability with social impact. We want to build housing that's genuinely affordable, accessible to families making 50 or 60% of area median income, but we also need to generate returns for our investors. Finding that equilibrium is complicated. I imagine it requires significant financing, I said. It does. We work with various funding sources, traditional bank loans, low-income housing tax credits, some philanthropic capital for the most ambitious projects, but it's never quite enough. We're always looking for mission-aligned investors who understand that affordable housing won't generate the same returns as luxury developments. My foundation does some work in affordable housing. We see it as connected to educational equity. Stable housing enables stable schooling. Perhaps there are opportunities for collaboration. Her face brightened. I'd love that. Let me put together some information about our current projects. If your foundation could provide even modest capital for one of our developments, it would make a real difference. Over the next 6 months, I became progressively more involved in the community. I funded scholarships at Ashcroft, not just through the Montrose Scholars Program, but additional one-time scholarships for students with specific needs. I provided seed capital for 3 of Celeste's housing developments, structured as program-related investments from my foundation. I made strategic donations to organizations where Preston Latimer and Adrian Whitlock served on boards. I attended social events, made myself visible and valuable. I was generous, supportive, encouraging. I helped them rise even higher. I bound them to me through money, through public association, through the kind of debt that accumulates when someone consistently supports your ambitions. The key was that nothing looked malicious. Everything was legitimate. I was exactly what I appeared to be, a successful philanthropist investing in his hometown, supporting good people doing good work. Jonathan Radcliffe, in particular, became increasingly dependent on my foundation's support. I learned through careful research that his real estate company had expanded aggressively during the mid-2000s, taking on significant debt to finance multiple large developments. The 2008 financial crisis had nearly destroyed them. Projects stalled, financing evaporated, several developments went into foreclosure. They'd survived, barely, and by 2015 were profitable again. But they were still heavily leveraged, carrying debt from the crisis years, operating with minimal margin for error. My foundation's investments in several of their projects, structured as mission-related investments in affordable housing components, provided crucial capital at favorable terms. Radcliffe was grateful, effusive in his thanks. He introduced me to other board members, advocated for increasing my role in school governance, praised my commitment to the community at every opportunity. I accepted his gratitude with appropriate humility, never mentioned that I was systematically documenting every aspect of our relationship, every dollar that flowed from my foundation to his company, building a comprehensive record of how dependent he'd become on my support. In private moments, when I was alone in my house, I would sometimes think about what I was doing, not whether it was right. I'd abandoned that question years ago, but whether it was necessary, whether the person I'd become was someone my mother would recognize. I decided she wouldn't. The boy she'd raised had believed in fairness, had trusted that hard work would be rewarded, had approached the world with optimistic naivety. That boy was dead. I was something else now, something harder, colder, more capable, but fundamentally alone. And I decided that was acceptable. My mother had died believing I'd disgraced myself, had spent her final months wondering if I'd actually cheated. That injustice could never be undone, but I could make sure everyone responsible for creating that injustice faced consequences proportional to what they'd done. The real work took 3 years, not the public work, the donations and the partnerships and the visible integration into the community. That was just stage setting. The real work was investigation, documentation, building an evidentiary foundation that would survive any scrutiny. I hired investigators, not local people. That would have been too obvious. I hired professionals from Boston and New York, former journalists and forensic accountants and private investigators who knew how to follow money and document corruption without leaving traces. I paid them well, very well, and told them what I needed. Everything about the national merit scandal from 15 years ago, digital forensics on the supposed evidence against me, financial records showing any payments related to witness testimony, email records from Ashcroft's servers, phone records, everything. They worked for 18 months, following leads, cultivating sources, recovering data that had supposedly been deleted or destroyed. They found more than I'd expected. The investigation revealed that the cheating scandal hadn't been a real security breach at all. The photographs of the exam materials that supposedly proved I'd cheated were fabricated. Digital composites created by combining legitimate photos of other school documents with images of the actual national merit examination, making it appear that someone had photographed the test materials in Dr. Ashcroft's office. The forensic analysis was definitive. The metadata on the photos had been manipulated to show they were taken on a device connected to Ashcroft's network during the time I was in Dr. Ashcroft's office. But deeper analysis of the image files revealed they were actually created 3 days later on a computer registered to Jonathan Radcliffe's home network. The image composition showed clear signs of digital manipulation, layers that had been combined, lighting inconsistencies that wouldn't exist in a genuine photograph, compression artifacts that indicated multiple stages of editing. The witness testimony about me claiming to have special knowledge of examination topics was even simpler. My investigators found 2 students who'd been paid $5,000 each to make statements they knew were false. One was Trevor Ashcroft, a distant cousin of Spencer, who'd attended Ashcroft Academy at the time. The other was a student named Nomi Latimer, Preston's younger sister. Both had been children of major school donors. Both had received their payments through a shell company registered to Jonathan Radcliffe's office. Both statements had been coordinated through a series of emails between Radcliffe and Victor Ashcroft, outlining exactly what the students should say and how to make their testimony sound credible. My investigators found these emails on an old backup server that Ashcroft Academy had retired in 2014 but hadn't properly wiped. The IT consultant who helped recover them explained that most organizations don't understand how difficult it is to truly delete data. Backups exist on multiple systems. Old hardware gets repurposed but not sanitized. Email archives persist long after they're supposedly removed. But the most damning evidence was a series of emails between Dr. Victor Ashcroft and Jonathan Radcliffe, sent 2 months before the National Merit Examination. The first email from Radcliffe to Ashcroft was dated February 3rd. Victor, we need to discuss the merit situation. I've been reviewing the preliminary rankings, and frankly, we have a problem. Celeste is ranked second behind the janitor's kid. She's worked incredibly hard for this, and his presence in the competition is creating uncomfortable narratives. People are already starting to talk about class stories, underdog narratives, how a scholarship student might beat the children of our most prominent families. It's overshadowing what should be a straightforward recognition of the school's best students. This isn't just about Celeste, it's about what Ashcroft represents. If a staff member's child wins the national merit, the story becomes about overcoming class barriers rather than about our educational excellence. That's not the narrative we need. I think we both know what needs to happen here. The question is execution. Call me when you have time to discuss privately. Jonathan and the response. Sent 2 days later. Jonathan, I understand your concern, and I share it. The optics are potentially problematic. However, we need to be extraordinarily careful here. Any action we take must be unimpeachable, must appear entirely legitimate. Let me give this some thought. There may be a way to address the situation that serves everyone's interests while maintaining our institutional integrity. I'll call you early next week to discuss options. Victor then, 3 weeks later, another exchange. Victor, I've consulted with a technical specialist who can help us with the documentation we discussed. The approach we outlined will work, but it requires your cooperation on the administrative side. The announcement, the internal investigation, ensuring appropriate consequences. Everything will be clean, professional, defensible. The evidence will be clear enough that no one will question it, but obscure enough that we don't need to expose it to detailed scrutiny. Are you comfortable proceeding with this plan? I need to know before we invest more resources in the preparation. Jonathan, yes. I've thought about this carefully, and I believe it's the right decision. It's regrettable but necessary. We're not just protecting Celeste's future. We're protecting an institution that serves hundreds of students. The scholarship student is bright, no question. But this is bigger than one student's future. We're preserving the integrity of the national merit competition, ensuring that the winner represents Ashcroft in the way we need them to. Proceed with the plan. I'll handle the administrative elements once you've assembled the documentation. Victor, there were more emails, discussions of timing, how long to wait after I helped with the exam verification before releasing the allegations, strategies for controlling the narrative, emphasizing my access to the materials, the apparent digital evidence, the witness testimony, plans for limiting my ability to contest, the findings, making it an internal investigation with no external review, refusing to share the actual evidence, threatening expulsion if I push back too hard. It was all there, not just negligence or misunderstanding, but deliberate, premeditated fraud. They'd planned to destroy me, documented their planning, and then executed exactly what they'd discussed. And then there was the final piece, a statement from Celeste herself, written but never sent, saved in her draft folder on the Ashcroft Academy email server. It had been written the day after the scandal broke at 11:47 p.m. My investigators recovered it from the same backup server that held the Ashcroft-Radcliffe emails. The draft read, "I need to tell someone the truth, and if I don't write it down now, I never will." He didn't do it. The student they're accusing, his name is my actual name, which I won't write even now. He didn't cheat. I know he didn't cheat because I was with my father 3 nights ago when he created the evidence. I came home late from a study session around 10 p.m., and there were people in my father's office. I could hear voices, so I went to check if everything was okay. The door was slightly open, and I saw my father working with someone I didn't recognize. Later, I learned it was a technical consultant from his company. They were looking at photographs on a computer screen, photos of exam materials, photos of school documents, images being combined and manipulated. I heard them discussing metadata, how to make it appear that the photos were taken at a specific time, how to connect them to a specific student's network credentials. I should have walked away, or I should have said something right then. Instead, I stood there frozen, listening, understanding exactly what they were doing. When I finally made a noise, my father looked up and saw me. He told the consultant to wait outside, then called me into his office. I asked him what was happening. He told me it was necessary, that it was being done to protect my future, to protect the family, to protect our reputation. He explained that the scholarship student was going to win the national merit, that his winning would create uncomfortable questions about class and privilege, that it would overshadow the school's reputation for excellence. He said this was the cleanest way to address the situation, that the student would face minimal consequences, that everyone would move on quickly. I asked if the student had actually done anything wrong. My father said no, but that it didn't matter. The student was talented but came from nothing, had no resources to fight back, no family to advocate for him. Meanwhile, Celeste had worked hard, deserved recognition, and came from a family that had given everything to Ashcroft. I should have refused. I should have said this was wrong, that I wouldn't benefit from destroying an innocent person. Instead, I asked if anyone would get hurt. My father promised no one would. The student would still graduate, would still have opportunities. This was just about the national merit. I believed him, or I wanted to believe him. I told myself that maybe the student had actually done something wrong, and my father was just helping prove it. I wanted to believe that because believing the alternative meant admitting my father had destroyed an innocent person to benefit me. I won the national merit 3 weeks later. I accepted the scholarship, the recognition, the opportunities it created. I've spent every day since then knowing that my success was built on someone else's destruction. I'm a coward. I knew what happened and I said nothing. I benefited from fraud and I stayed silent. I don't know how to live with this. I don't know how to be the person my father wants me to be when I know what kind of person I actually am. I should send this to someone. The National Merit Organization, a journalist, someone who investigate and reveal the truth. But I won't. I'll save this draft and I'll delete it tomorrow, and I'll continue pretending that I earned what I have. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry to him, though he'll never see this. I'm sorry to myself for being this weak. I'm sorry to everyone who believes in me, who thinks I'm someone worth respecting. I'm not. The draft had never been sent. Instead, Celeste had saved it, presumably planning to delete it the next day. But email systems preserve drafts even after they're deleted, and backup processes capture everything. The draft had existed in Ashcroft's backup systems for 15 years, waiting to be discovered. I sat in my study the night I received the full investigative report. 3 years of work compiled into a 400-page document with appendices containing all the source evidence. Bank records showing the $5,000 payments to the student witnesses, with clear trails linking the payments to a shell company controlled by Jonathan Radcliffe. Server logs showing exactly when and where the fabricated evidence was created. The emails, the draft statement, detailed interviews with people who'd been involved at the margins, the IT consultant who'd helped create the fake metadata, the photography expert who'd built the composite images, both of whom were willing to provide testimony in exchange for immunity from any legal consequences. It was overwhelming. Not just the evidence, I'd known they were guilty from the beginning, but the deliberateness of it, the planning, the casual way they'd discussed destroying a 17-year-old's future, the way Victor Ashcroft had looked me in the eye and expressed disappointed trust while knowing exactly what he'd done. I thought about my mother, how she'd died believing I'd disgraced myself, how she'd spent her final months wondering if I'd actually cheated, if the boy she'd raised had compromised his integrity. She'd never said it directly, but I'd seen the question in her eyes that last lucid conversation. "You didn't cheat, did you?" As though she'd been carrying doubt all those years. The rage I felt wasn't hot. It was cold, precise, the kind of anger that doesn't make you do something stupid. It makes you do something methodical. I spent 3 months preparing the release, not just organizing the evidence, but building the narrative structure, identifying the media outlets that would treat it seriously, timing everything for maximum impact. I worked with a documentary filmmaker named Elliot Radcliffe, no relation to Jonathan, despite the shared last name. Elliot specialized in investigative journalism, had won awards for documentaries about corporate corruption and institutional failure. I'd met him years earlier through my media consulting work, and I trusted him to handle this story with the rigor it deserved. I gave him everything. The entire investigative report, all the source documents, access to the investigators who'd done the research. I told him I wanted him to verify everything independently, to conduct his own interviews, to build a comprehensive story that would survive any scrutiny. "Why now?" he asked during our first meeting. "This happened 15 years ago. You could have released this evidence at any point. Why wait this long?" "Because releasing it immediately would have looked like revenge," I said. "An angry teenager making accusations against powerful people. They would have destroyed the evidence, controlled the narrative, painted me as a vindictive liar. Now I have the resources to do this properly. And now they've had 15 years to build lives and reputations on foundations I'm going to expose as fraudulent." He nodded slowly. "You want them at their peak before you bring them down. I want the fall to be proportional to what they did. They destroyed my future when I had nothing. I'm destroying their present when they have everything." Elliot spent 8 months on the project. He verified every piece of evidence independently. He tracked down the students who'd been paid to provide false testimony, both now in their early 30s, both willing to speak on camera about what they'd been asked to do. He interviewed the IT consultant, the photography expert, former Ashcroft staff members who remembered the scandal. He obtained official statements from the National Merit Organization about their investigation protocols and how they'd been misled by Ashcroft's fabricated evidence. He also tried to interview the principals involved. Victor Ashcroft declined. Jonathan Radcliffe declined. Spencer Ashcroft agreed to an interview, but claimed he had no knowledge of his father's actions. Celeste initially agreed, then withdrew, then finally agreed again and gave an interview that was painful to watch, her acknowledging that she'd known, that she'd stayed silent, that she'd built a career on fraud. The result was a 90-minute documentary called The Merit Test: How Elite Schools Rig the Game. It debuted at a major film festival in January of my 33rd year, 15 years and 3 months after the original scandal. By February, it had been picked up by a major streaming platform. By March, it had been viewed 20 million times. By April, it was the subject of national conversation about class, privilege, and institutional corruption in elite education. The documentary didn't just expose the Ashcroft scandal. It used the scandal as a case study to examine broader patterns of corruption in elite education. It showed how wealthy families leveraged influence to ensure their children's success, how institutions protected themselves rather than students, how systems of supposed meritocracy were actually rigged from the beginning. But Ashcroft was the centerpiece. The emails were shown verbatim, read aloud by actors in a stark voiceover. The investigators explained in technical detail how the evidence fabrication worked, how composite images were created, how metadata was manipulated, how the entire scheme was designed to be superficially convincing while avoiding any genuine scrutiny. The students who'd been paid to lie appeared on camera, older now, expressing genuine remorse. Trevor Ashcroft, Preston's cousin, explained how he'd been approached by his family, how they'd told him it was necessary to protect the school's reputation, how they'd assured him no one would really be hurt. "I was 18, he said, looking directly at the camera. "I didn't understand what I was doing, or maybe I did understand, and I did it anyway because my family asked me to. Either way, I participated in destroying an innocent person's future. I've had to live with that." The IT consultant explained the technical process of creating the fake metadata, of making digital files appear to have properties they didn't actually have. He'd been paid $15,000 for the work, had been assured it was for a legitimate internal investigation. "They told me they needed to prove something that had actually happened," he said, "that they had evidence of wrongdoing but needed to present it in a specific format for administrative purposes. I didn't ask enough questions. I should have." And then Celeste's draft email was shown. The documentary handled it carefully. Elliot had Celeste herself read it aloud, on camera, 15 years after she'd written it. The reading was devastating. Her voice broke multiple times. She cried openly. And when she finished, she looked at the camera and said, "I wrote this the day after he was accused. I knew the truth. I knew he was innocent, and I did nothing. I've spent 15 years trying to justify that silence, trying to convince myself that I was too young to know better, that I was manipulated by my father, that there was nothing I could have done. But that's all lies. I could have spoken up. I could have shown this draft to someone, could have demanded an investigation, could have refused to accept the National Merit Award that I knew was fraudulent. I chose my comfort over his future. I chose silence over integrity. And that choice has defined everything I've become." The response was immediate and catastrophic. The National Merit Organization revoked Celeste's win within 48 hours of the documentary's release. They issued a statement saying they'd been deceived by Ashcroft Academy's false evidence, that their investigation had been compromised by institutional fraud, that they were conducting a comprehensive review of all national merit competitions involving Ashcroft over the previous 20 years. They also announced they were retroactively awarding the scholarship to me, the student who should have won based on legitimate examination results. The financial value was meaningless at this point, but the symbolic recognition mattered. Dr. Victor Ashcroft, retired for 6 years, released a statement through his attorney denying any wrongdoing. The statement claimed he'd been acting on information provided by others, that he'd believed the evidence was legitimate, that he'd been deceived by Jonathan Radcliffe. The statement lasted 3 days before additional evidence emerged. Emails showing Victor Ashcroft directly coordinating the payment to the student witnesses, instructions he'd given about how to structure the internal investigation to prevent my family from having any meaningful recourse. He stopped issuing public statements after that. Spencer Ashcroft, the current headmaster, initially tried to defend his father and the institution. In a letter to alumni and parents, he wrote that while mistakes had clearly been made, they needed to understand the context of 15 years ago, the different standards that existed then, the good intentions that underlay the flawed execution. The letter was a disaster. Alumni revolted. Parents threatened to withdraw their children. Students organized protests demanding accountability. A week after the documentary premiered, Spencer resigned. In his resignation statement, he acknowledged that the institution had failed its fundamental responsibility to protect student integrity, that his father's actions were indefensible, that the school needed new leadership untainted by the scandal. Jonathan Radcliffe's real estate company began hemorrhaging contracts within 2 weeks of the documentary's release. 3 major projects were canceled by municipal governments that didn't want to be associated with someone exposed as a fraud. His bank, citing reputational concerns and reassessing risk, called several construction loans. Without the liquidity to continue operations, Radcliffe Development Corporation filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. The bankruptcy proceedings revealed the extent of his company's financial instability. They were carrying $230 million in debt against assets that were overvalued by at least 40%. When forced to sell those assets at market rates to satisfy creditors, there wasn't enough to cover the outstanding obligations. Jonathan Radcliffe's personal assets, including the family home that Celeste had grown up in, a 6-bedroom mansion in the historic district, were sold to satisfy personal guarantees he'd made on corporate debt. The house sold for $2.8 million to a tech entrepreneur from Boston. Celeste herself faced perhaps the most personal consequences. Her professional reputation collapsed immediately. Business partnerships dissolved within days. Organizations that had been working with Radcliffe Development specifically because of her involvement in affordable housing projects quietly severed those relationships. Nonprofit boards asked for her resignation. Clients terminated contracts. She tried to defend herself in a written statement, explaining that she'd been 18, that she'd been manipulated, that she'd spent 15 years trying to atone through her work. The statement was ignored. The court of public opinion had decided that knowing the truth and staying silent was worse than participating actively in the fraud. The social isolation was worse than the professional consequences. Friends stopped returning her calls. Invitations to events dried up. She became someone people crossed the street to avoid, whose presence at any gathering made others uncomfortable. Preston Latimer, Adrian Whitlock, and Elodie Pennington weren't directly implicated in the scandal itself. They hadn't known about the fraud, hadn't participated in creating the evidence. But their association with Ashcroft and their public friendship with Celeste became toxic. Preston tried to distance himself, releasing a statement expressing shock and disappointment at what he'd learned. The statement was careful, diplomatic, but it didn't matter. His nonprofit board pressured him to resign from his position as chairman, worried that his connection to the scandal would affect their fundraising. Adrian lost a high-profile prosecution when the defense attorney argued that his judgment couldn't be trusted given his association with institutional fraud. The argument was legally dubious, but it created enough doubt that the case ended in a hung jury. Elodie's newspaper chain ran extensive coverage of the scandal. They had to. It was legitimate news. But every story included mentions of her connection to Ashcroft, her presence in the top 5 that year, the fact that her family had donated significantly to the school. Readers questioned whether she'd known, whether she'd benefited, whether her current position was legitimate or another example of privilege protecting itself. The media coverage was relentless. Local news, national news, cable news panels, investigative journalism programs, podcasts, think pieces in major newspapers and magazines. The story had everything the media loved: class warfare, elite hypocrisy, a sympathetic victim, clear villains, documentary evidence. My name, my real name, was everywhere. Articles described me as falsely accused, systematically destroyed, innocent victim of elite corruption. Some outlets tracked down my mother's obituary, ran photos of our small house, created narratives about the struggling custodian who'd sacrificed everything for her son, only to see him destroyed by the people she served. I didn't participate in the media coverage. I turned down every interview request, every invitation to comment, every opportunity to appear on television and tell my story. My foundation released a brief statement. We are focused on our work ensuring that all students, regardless of economic background, have access to educational opportunities. We prefer to let the evidence speak for itself, and we trust that institutions will take appropriate action to ensure this kind of systematic fraud can never happen again. In truth, I couldn't bear to be publicly celebrated. The vindication felt hollow. My mother was dead. The years I'd lost couldn't be recovered. The person I'd been at 17, optimistic, trusting, believing the system would protect merit, was gone forever, replaced by someone who understood that fairness was something you built through leverage, and that trust was a liability. 3 months after the documentary premiered, I received a letter. Paper envelope, handwritten address, delivered to my foundation's office. I recognized Celeste's handwriting before I opened it, the same neat script I remembered from study sessions 15 years ago. Inside was a single page, handwritten, "Damien, if that's even your real name, I won't insult you by apologizing." Words like sorry are meaningless for what I did, or rather, what I failed to do. I could tell you that I was 18, that I believed my father when he told me it was necessary, that I convinced myself you must have done something to justify what happened. But those are explanations, not excuses. The truth is simpler and worse. I was a coward. I chose my comfort over your future. I chose silence over integrity. And I've spent 15 years living with that choice, building a life on a foundation I knew was fraudulent. You destroyed everything I built, my career, my reputation, my family's financial security, my father's health. You had every right to do it. More than that, you were morally correct to do it. The documentary was meticulously fair, focused on evidence rather than revenge. You gave me more dignity than I gave you. I won't ask for forgiveness. I won't ask you to understand or sympathize. I'm writing this because you deserve to know that I understand what I did, that I don't contest what happened, and that if I could go back and choose differently, I would. For whatever it's worth, which is probably nothing, I'm sorry. Not for what you did to me, for what I did to you. Celeste, I read the letter 3 times, then folded it carefully and put it in a drawer in my study. I didn't respond. There was nothing to say. No words could undo what had happened, and no apology could restore what I'd lost. 2 months later, I heard through community channels that Jonathan Radcliffe had a stroke. He survived, but the recovery was slow and incomplete. He had partial paralysis on his left side, difficulty speaking, cognitive impairments that made it impossible for him to manage even basic affairs. Celeste moved back home to care for him, giving up her apartment in the city, selling most of her possessions to pay for his medical care. She took a job doing administrative work for a nonprofit that served homeless populations, the only organization that would hire her, and even then only for entry-level work that didn't involve public representation. I heard she worked quietly, competently, never complained. She showed up every day, did her work, went home to care for her father. She didn't try to rebuild her reputation, didn't seek redemption through public service. She just existed, diminished, living with consequences. Victor Ashcroft died 8 months after the documentary premiered. Heart attack, sudden, at home in his retirement community in Florida. His obituary in the local paper mentioned his 40 years of service to Ashcroft Academy, his role in building the school's reputation, his family's long legacy of educational leadership. But it led with his involvement in the fabricated cheating scandal, the documentary evidence of his fraud, the institutional corruption he'd orchestrated. His funeral was private. Spencer didn't attend. He'd relocated to Colorado, taken a position at a small private school where his name carried less weight. Most of the extended Ashcroft family stayed away, unwilling to be publicly associated with the scandal. The school itself survived, but changed fundamentally. New administration, new policies, comprehensive reforms to governance and oversight. The Board of Trustees was reconstituted with more diverse representation, more people from outside the traditional elite networks, more focus on actual educational mission rather than institutional prestige. My foundation maintained its relationship with the school, continuing to fund the Montrose Scholars Program. But I never returned to campus, never attended board meetings in person. I participated remotely when necessary, but I couldn't bring myself to walk those hallways again. I'd achieved everything I set out to achieve. They were destroyed, not through violence or spectacle, but through documentation and truth. Their reputations were annihilated. Their futures were constrained. Their comfortable lives were dismantled. The system that had protected them turned against them when the evidence became undeniable, and I felt empty. I'm 35 now. I run a successful foundation that genuinely helps lower-income students access educational opportunities. Last year, we provided full scholarships to 43 students across 12 schools. We funded summer enrichment programs, college application support, mentorship initiatives. The work is real, the impact is measurable, the outcomes are positive. I live in a nice house in a city where nobody knows my history. I have professional acquaintances, people I work with, colleagues I respect. I've dated occasionally, met people through work or mutual friends, had relationships that lasted a few months before ending amicably. But I don't have real friends. I don't trust easily, and the kind of relationships that require trust, real intimacy, vulnerability, letting someone see who you actually are, feel impossible. I've built a life based on controlled information, strategic presentation, maintaining distance. Letting someone close would mean exposing the architecture of that construction, and I don't know how to do that. Sometimes I think about alternative versions of my life. The one where I won the national merit legitimately, went to a top university, built a career without spending 15 years in exile and reconstruction. I wonder who I would have become in that timeline. Probably someone softer, someone who still believed systems could be fair, someone who could form connections without constantly calculating whether they were being leveraged or manipulated, someone who could laugh without wondering if the laughter was genuine or performative, someone who could be vulnerable without seeing it as weakness. That person is dead, or rather, he never got to exist. He was killed at 17, replaced by someone harder, colder, more capable, but fundamentally alone. The revenge itself was perfect. I can review it objectively and recognize that it was executed with precision, that every element was justified, that the people who were destroyed deserved to be destroyed. The evidence was irrefutable, the documentation overwhelming, the consequences proportional. But perfection doesn't equal satisfaction. I thought vindication would feel different. I thought proof of my innocence, public acknowledgement of what was done to me, the ruination of the people responsible. I thought that would close something, would allow me to move forward as someone who'd been wronged, but was now made whole. Instead, I just feel tired. My mother is still dead. I still spent years believing she doubted me, watching her decline, knowing she carried that doubt to her grave. The career I might have had, the relationships I might have built, the version of myself that might have existed, none of that was restored by destroying the Ashcrofts and the Radcliffes. I won. Completely, decisively, publicly. I proved I was right, and they were wrong. I showed the world exactly what they did and made them face consequences that matched the magnitude of their crime, and it didn't heal anything. There's a psychological concept called the hedonic treadmill, the idea that people return to a baseline level of happiness, regardless of positive or negative events. Lottery winners and paraplegics supposedly return to similar levels of life satisfaction within a few years of their transformative experiences. I think there's a similar concept for trauma. You can achieve justice, you can get revenge, you can correct the record, but you can't undo the fundamental change that the original injury created. The person you were before the trauma doesn't come back just because you've achieved vindication. I'm not the person I was supposed to be. I'm the person that experience made me, and no amount of vindication changes that. I still do the work. The foundation is real, the scholarships are genuine. The students we help receive actual opportunities that change their lives. I'm good at what I do, strategic, organized, effective at identifying needs and deploying resources. I'm also fundamentally disconnected from it. I go through the motions of helping because I understand intellectually that it's valuable, but I can't feel the kind of joy or satisfaction that should come from meaningful work. It's all performance, professional competence without emotional investment. Last month, I was at an event where one of our scholarship recipients was speaking. She was 18, first-generation college student, planning to study engineering at a top university. She talked about how the scholarship had made everything possible, how she'd never dreamed she could attend a school like that, how grateful she was for the opportunity. She was earnest, excited, full of hope about her future. Her eyes shone when she talked about the classes she'd take, the research she'd do, the career she'd build. I watched her and thought, I used to be like that. I used to believe that working hard and being smart was enough. I used to think the system would recognize merit and reward it fairly. And then I thought, I'm glad she still believes that. I hope she gets to keep believing it. I hope her experience is different from mine. I hope she never learns what I learned about how easily the system can be corrupted, how little protection merit provides against institutional power. But I also thought, if it's not, if someone tries to destroy her the way they destroyed me, I hope she has the resources to fight back. I hope she becomes the kind of person who can build power patiently and use it decisively. I hope she doesn't spend 15 years believing she deserves what happened to her. That's the legacy, I guess. Not healing, but armor. Not peace, but capability. Not the restoration of who I was, but the creation of systems that might protect others from similar destruction. I'm sitting in my study as I write this, the same study where I read the investigative report 3 years ago. The drawer where I put Celeste's letter is 2 feet from my left hand. I haven't opened it since the day I received it. Sometimes I think about responding, telling her that I accept her apology, or that I don't, or that it doesn't matter anymore. But I never do, because any response would require me to care, and I've built a life on not caring about anything that could hurt me. That's what revenge cost. Not my morality. I don't regret what I did, not my success. The foundation is thriving, I'm financially secure, professionally respected. But my capacity to be vulnerable, to trust, to believe that people are fundamentally good or that systems can be fair, I won. The evidence is irrefutable. I destroyed everyone responsible for destroying me. I did it methodically, patiently, with overwhelming documentation that survived every challenge. And I'm completely, fundamentally alone. If someone asked me whether it was worth it, I wouldn't know how to answer. Was justice worth becoming someone who can't form real relationships? Was vindication worth spending 15 years building power instead of building a life? Was destroying them worth the permanent cost to who I am? I'm not sure the question even makes sense. Once they destroyed me, the original version of my life became impossible. The choice wasn't between revenge and happiness. It was between revenge and nothing. Between destroying them and remaining destroyed myself. Between fighting back and accepting permanent defeat. I chose to destroy them. I'd make the same choice again, but I want you to understand what that choice cost. I'm 35 years old. I'm professionally successful, financially secure, publicly vindicated. People respect me, my work matters. My foundation helps hundreds of students every year. I've achieved everything I set out to achieve after I left town 15 years ago, and I'm completely empty. That's the truth about revenge. Not that it's wrong, or that it doesn't work, or that it won't give you satisfaction. The truth is simpler and harder. It works perfectly, and you'll still be exactly what they made. You, someone defined by what was done to them, forever shaped by the need to prove something that shouldn't have required proof. I won. But the person who deserved to win that national merit examination, who deserved to have a normal college experience and build a career on merit and form relationships based on trust, that person died at 17, destroyed by people who were supposed to protect institutional integrity. I avenged him, but I couldn't resurrect him. That's what I learned. That's what 15 years of careful reconstruction taught me. That you can achieve perfect revenge, overwhelm your enemies with evidence and truth, destroy everyone who wronged you, and still spend the rest of your life alone in a well-furnished house, technically vindicated, but fundamentally hollowed out. The documentary has been viewed over 50 million times now. Ashcroft Academy has reformed its policies, implemented new oversight structures, become a model for how institutions should address historical injustices. The National Merit Organization has completely overhauled its security protocols. My story has become a case study in educational equity, a warning about institutional corruption, a reference point for discussions about class and privilege in elite education. And I sit in my study every evening, successful and solvent and completely isolated, wondering who I might have been if I'd never been asked to verify those examination materials. I'll never know. That possibility died 15 years ago, along with my mother's trust and my naive belief in fairness. All that remains is this: I won. I proved I was right. I destroyed everyone responsible, and it changed absolutely nothing about who I became. Stories like this happen more often than we think. Subscribe if you want to hear the ones that usually stay unspoken. And if this story made you pause, a like helps the channel grow.